Welcome to the Workplace Wellbeing Essential Series. I'm Mari Ryan. I'm the CEO and founder of Advancing Wellness. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to this expert interview where we explore topics that impact employee well-being. My guest today is Todd Cherches. Todd is the CEO and co-founder of Big Blue Gumball, a New York City-based consulting firm specializing in leadership development, public speaking, and executive coaching, as well as a founding partner of the Global Institute for Thought Leadership. He is a 3-time award-winning adjunct professor of leadership at NYU and a lecturer on leadership at Columbia University. Todd is also a TEDx speaker and the author of Visual Leadership, Leveraging the Power of Visual Thinking in Leadership and in Life. And you can see I'm already well into this book. So Todd, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Mari, thank you. I just finished reading your book and I look forward to discussing both our books. How to create a more thriving workplace.
Exactly. Well, we're going to talk a little about thriving workplaces today from the perspective of culture. So much has changed in the way that we've worked. We're working now and have different from what we were doing a year ago as a result of the pandemic. So many businesses have been forced to send their employees to work from home. And now with these distributed workforces, it really makes it challenging to have really a culture and create a culture where people really feel like they belong and the impact that that can have on the way that people work. So as we discuss culture today, let's talk a little bit about how do you create that culture of collaboration, community, and connection with a distributed workforce?
To me, one of the challenges is, first of all, how do we define culture, right? So one of the basic definitions I've heard is like, that's the way we do things here is our culture, right? Whether it's a culture of a country or a religion or anyone, right? What is culture is the way we dress and eat and interact, how we interact with each other. So for example, one of my clients, a big part of their culture, I won't mention their name, but they're a Wall Street company with kind of a .com culture. A big part of their culture is the pool tables and massages and all the old school Google types of stuff, right? Friday lunches. But when everyone's working from home, first of all, you can't do it. And secondly, how much do people actually care about that stuff anymore? So in terms of onboarding new employees, how do you get them ingrained in your culture? In terms of creating what you said, communication and collaboration and connection, how do you do that when people are working from home? Right. I know someone who's changed jobs twice over the course of the pandemic without leaving his living room, right? So he's working for a different company with a different culture. And yet what does that actually mean on a daily basis in terms of how you get your work done and how you interact with others? So that's a big, some of the things that we're trying to wrestle with right now.
Yeah, we're wrestling with so much. And I'm curious, in the work that you do from a leadership perspective, both in what you're teaching in these advanced degree programs, as well as the work you're doing, both coaching and consulting with clients. I'm curious about what are some of the behaviors that you are actually, encouraging leaders to strive for when we think about creating a thriving culture?
Well, some things stay the same and other things can't, right? So for example, one of the classic management approaches is called MBWA, managing by walking around, right? So that's the manager getting out of their office and stopping by people's desks and saying, how's it going today? Anything I can help you with? Or my door is always open, right? When you're working from home, that goes away, right? So one of the dilemmas managers are facing, and my focus right now is helping to manage and lead in a COVID and post-COVID world, is if you check in too often, you seem like a micromanager or a babysitter even. If you don't check in often enough, one, you don't feel comfortable or confident in terms of what's going on. And then people may feel abandoned or disconnected or disengaged. So that's one of the biggest challenges as I talk to managers. I was just talking to a new client yesterday and he's really wrestling with that. How often or how infrequently do you check in? And in terms of coworkers, same thing with collaboration. When people are working from home and you're thinking, oh, they're taking care of a child, they're doing homeschooling, or they're dealing with, or maybe they have health issues or whatever, you actually hesitate to reach out to someone. So instead of just looking across the hall and seeing who's in their cubicle or stopping by someone's office, these are all things that as employees, whether you're a manager or not, you're wrestling with right now. It's just the behaviors, what's acceptable, what's not, what's intrusive. And in a 24-hour world, we're all working different schedules. As a manager, do you want your people, some managers want their people at their computer from 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 every day, but is it okay if their employee doesn't do that because they can and gets their work done at 8 or 9 or 10 at night? We were talking earlier, I'm a night owl. I get most of my best thinking done between midnight and 4 a.m., but that's not for everyone, right?
Right. Well, how do they create I guess it's part of its communication, part of it's, the transparency, and part of it's about trust and autonomy, right? You have to build that culture where you deliver a message to your employees that says, I trust you're going to get the work done, or even among work teams, right? That the work team builds that culture within the team, that they trust each other. They know they're going to have each other's back. They're going to get the work done. They're going to accomplish their objectives. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, you just remind me of a quote from Good to Great by Jim Collins, where he says, don't discipline people, hire self-disciplined people, and then turn them loose within the framework of freedom and accountability, right? So you treat people like adults, you allow them to get their work done, but the big part is coming up with guiding principles or ground rules or whatever you want to call them, expectations, clarifying expectations. So there's no guessing game. So if you say to your boss, hey, I'm going to be unreachable for like 4 hours in the middle of the day today, the manager needs to hold people accountable based on producing results, not punching a time clock, right? So that Fred Flintstone punch the time clock thing, we're living in a different world right now. So we need to have different measures of success in terms of what our expectations are for our employees. And communication is the foundation of everything. Because one of my mantras is that people are not mind readers. So if your boss thinks you're working and you're not, it creates suspicion. Well, if you just say, hey, I'm not going to be reachable, and the person, you need to create a culture and a climate where it says, okay, thanks for letting me know, and I'll talk to you later, right?
Right. Yeah. So again, that creates that trust, autonomy, and, builds for a culture where people are going to feel like they're being treated like adults.
Yeah. In this book, Drive, Dan Pink talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? Autonomy is freedom to do your work the way that's best for you. Mastery, you want to be doing something where you're growing and learning and developing. And purpose, you want to be doing work that matters, right? So whether you're in the office or working from home, if you manage and lead with that mindset, then you'll set your people up for success.
Absolutely. That's great. I'm curious from your perspective, when you think about culture and the way that you're working with leaders in organizations around this, how does culture impact employee well-being?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a culture of high pressure and high stress, people are going to get sick. People are going to not do their best work when they're in fear, a state of chaos and panic. So one of the things we could do as managers and leaders is to help to calm things down a little bit. And one of the sayings out there is we're living in a VUCA world, or a hyper VUCA world, where VUCA is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So I actually wrote a blog post on this, that leaders need to be doing the opposite of VUCA. So the opposite of volatility is calmness. So as a manager or leader, calm things down. Uncertainty, we don't have all the answers, we don't know what's going on, but we need to acknowledge that and then determine what are we certain about, right? What are some of the things that we know? VUCA, the C, complexity. Can we simplify things? The world is complex enough, but in terms of everything, technology, getting your work done, we need to try to make things as simple as possible. Einstein said, make things as simple as possible, but no simpler. And Da Vinci said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, right? So how can we simplify complexity so we get things done and get the right things done? And then the A in VUCA, ambiguity, can we find some clarity in this chaotic world that we're living in? So as a leader, if you could do those things, you'll counteract that VUCA world that we're living in and set your people up for success. I always talk about R&R, not rest and relaxation, that comes later, but resources and roadblocks. As managers, you need to give people the resources they need and remove the roadblocks that stand in their way. If you could do those two things, you're going to be setting your people up for success.
Such great advice. I love you're turning VUCA around. So that's really, really great and so appropriate for everything we're dealing with right now. That is just wonderful. So we've talked a little bit about employee well-being, and I couldn't help when I was reading your book. And again, you've got my little notes here, is you mentioned in several places, and I was kind of fascinated by this. First, I think what you call the bosses from hell, and then post-traumatic boss syndrome. Do I have that right?
Yes.
So I'd love to hear your story. Share with our audience your stories about these bosses from hell, because I can't imagine that must have been a culture that was a great place to work. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've worked in Hollywood. I've worked in Wall Street, two of the most toxic industries, around. If you notice that the dedication of my book, it's dedicated first to my wife, secondly to my parents, and thirdly to all the horrible bosses without whom this book would never have been written. So that's one of my claims to fame, is having worked for some of the worst bosses who've ever set foot on this planet. A big part of that was having worked in the entertainment industry. I started out in advertising in New York. Decent bosses, good bosses. I moved out to LA, and I worked for different companies, including Aaron Spelling and Columbia Pictures, Disney, and CBS, in and around program development. And I just happened to get one of the worst bosses in history. She was not only incompetent, but she was also insecure. So that's like a deadly combination. So there was no trust there. She always was thinking I was doing something behind her back or whatever, when all I was trying to do was do my job. So one of the stories I tell, my students are always horrified that I lived through this, but I was just sitting at my desk at a major TV network. I won't mention which one by name, but it has a C, a B, and an S in its title. But so I'm sitting at my desk typing up a memo, and I hear my boss's office door fling open, and I feel something whip by my head. And it turned out my boss had thrown a box of pens at my head, started screaming at me because they were the wrong ones. They were a paper mate, but she wanted the fine point, and these were the medium point. And when I'm teaching feedback in my leadership classes, I actually pose the question to my students. I don't know, if you were the boss there, is there any other way you might have given your employee the feedback that they were the wrong pens? Like, I'm at a loss. I can't think of anything. You throw it at their head.
Oh my God.
That's the only way they're going to learn. And it sounds like a scene from a movie, but it was literally a scene from my job. And I actually kept an abuse log, which I still have to this day. And I pose a little picture of it in my book, because every day she did something that was either sadistic or passive aggressive, and you start to think you're crazy. You start to question your own sanity.
Yeah.
Because a normal person just wouldn't act like that. And one day I actually sat down with her, and I said, "Can we talk?" And then she basically said to me, "Quit whining, get back to your desk. And if you don't like it," she said, and I quote, "When I had your job, I was treated like, let's say, crap. And now it's your turn. And if you don't like it, I can replace you tomorrow." So it's like, how do you? I was 30 years old at the time. I finally achieved my dream of working for a TV network, and that's what I was thrust into. So there's a lot of stories beyond that, but that's the essence of it.
And I'm curious, how long did you stay working for that horrible boss?
Well, long story short, she walked in one day, opened her door. She said, "Come into my office for a second." And she just said to me, "I can't take it anymore. You're fired." And she said, "Pack your bags and pack your stuff and leave."
So it was your fault.
And I didn't know what to do. So I put my stuff in a box, and I was heading down to HR, and I stopped by the vice president's office. This was my boss's boss's boss. And we had kind of a relationship because he was a fellow New Yorker. And I said, "Jonathan, I just want to say goodbye and thank you." And he's like, "Where are you going? It's 10 in the morning. I said, "Tally." Oh, I just slipped on her name. Let's just call her Terry. Terry just fired me. He said, "Why?" I said, "She wouldn't tell me. She just said, 'You're fired.'" He said, "Tell her to get her ass down here." So I went back to my office. Again, I'm walking around with my box. Everyone was looking, all my peers. And so I'm sitting there on my desk holding my box, not knowing what to do. And then I said, "Jonathan wants to see you." We heard screaming from down the hall. And then she came walking back, mascara dripping down her face. And she just said to me, "You're not fired, get back to work." And then she slammed her door. So that lasted, she was put on notice. She lasted about 3 or 4 more months. She got fired. And I took over her job with the promise of, if I did a good job, I would be promoted into that role. And then I find out one day, "Todd, we want to introduce you to your new boss." And they brought someone in who was younger than me and experienced, but had gone to the same university as the president. And he said, "He's your new boss. Can you train him to do that job?" So the writing was on the wall that this toxic environment was not for me. And I'm an extreme introvert, even though I talk loud and fast because I'm from New York. I'm what you call a 3Bs. I call myself a back of the room, behind the scenes bookworm. So for me to deal with this, I didn't really speak up and speak out. And I finally left because it just, I realized that there was no way to go from here. So anyway, that's my story. You pulled it out of me.
Yeah, I certainly did. And I think it's a classic example of a toxic culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, it fits
Well, that
all
guy was
all all of the requirements,
Yeah,
right?
people just got away. That's the Hollywood culture, and people just got away with that. We hear about like the Harvey Weinsteins, but and
Mm,
that's the biggest. But there's a lot of mini Harveys and Harriet Weinsteins. It was not just males; it was females as well. But
right,
a big part of Hollywood is a culture of power, control, ego,
right,
money,
right.
and when those are your values, and that's all you care about. There's no management leadership development, or I can't say there is not now. It's changed a lot since then, but back then, in the let's call it the early 90s, there wasn't, and people just got away with that behavior.
Well, we can only pray that people are being held accountable for their behavior and that those kinds of work situations no longer exist in that industry or in any other. But
Yeah.
perhaps I'm a little hopeful and naive about that.
Yeah, but it gave me a lot of great stories, like I said. So in some ways, as painful as it was, I learned a lot. I learned how not, to be honest, all serious, I learned how not to manage and lead people. Like, it's
Yeah,
like kind of someone who's abused as a child. Either you become an abusive parent, or you say, I know what it's like, and you become more empathetic and compassionate. As a boss, as a
right.
professor, I would never I wouldn't have done that anyway, but knowing what it feels like, and I coined the term post-traumatic boss disorder, because I had a situation where I ran into another toxic boss. I was sitting in an NYU faculty meeting, and I looked across the room, and my second most horrible boss was in the room. And actually, my heart started pounding through my chest. I actually started shaking. I experienced the reaction I used to get working for her, even though it was 20 years later. And I actually had to go to the men's room and just splash water on my face. And that's how ingrained in us. That's what the toxic culture can do to us psychologically. So psychological safety is one of the topics that we could talk about. But how do you create that climate where people do feel safe and can be vulnerable in your workplace? And that's how you contribute to an environment of wellness, right? Because you can't be well if you're under that level of stress while you're trying to get your work done.
Well, certainly not. We can see how this would, certainly diminish the well-being of anybody who's working in those kinds of
It
situations.
impacts your health, your mental health, your
Of
physical
course.
health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I was
all
having
there.
stomach issues. I was having
Ugh.
little shakes. I mean, just from what I was subjected to.
And it's so amazing that 20 years later, it could trigger that physical reaction,
Yeah.
not just the emotional reaction, but that physical reaction from you as well.
Yeah, my doctor, Dr. Rudin, wrote a book called When the Past is Always Present. And it's true, like the past doesn't leave you, there are all kinds of triggers, but yeah, it could come flooding back to you in a second with a reminder of it.
Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Let's go back to this idea about leaders and why should leaders care about creating thriving cultures in the workplace?
Yeah. Well, one, it's just the right thing to do. But also, I always say when you're talking to someone, there's two thought bubbles over their head. That's WSIC, why should I care? And WIFM, what's in it for me? So for a leader, what's the why should I care and what's in it for me? It's basically very practical. It's like if you treat people well, you're going to attract talent, you're going to engage people, you're going to retain talent. People are going to be more willing to jump through hoops for you and get things done for you and the organization if they're treated well, if they're respected. So I think that's one of the other books. I mentioned Dan Pink's Drive and Autonomy, Mastery, and Purpose, but another model I teach in my class is the book, The Progress Principle. If you set people up for success so they make progress and then recognize and acknowledge that progress, they're going to feel that sense of satisfaction and engagement in their work. So again, it's just about being kind. It's about being empathetic. It's about being compassionate. It's about helping your people succeed, creating an environment where you can be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm struggling or I'm having a bad day, and knowing that you won't be beaten up for that. So like in that Hollywood job and that industry, people just couldn't do that. People couldn't say, hey, I'm having a bad day, or they're like, just deal with it. I don't care, right? So I think there are tangible benefits, because what does it cost to have a disengaged employee? What does it cost to replace an employee that you've invested in and they leave and they take their knowledge and experience out the door with them? So there's real practical monetary reasons, but also just there are real human reasons in terms of integrity and doing the right thing. Peter Drucker said, management is doing things right, leadership is doing the right thing. And when you do this, you're doing both, doing it right and doing it because it is right.
Well, I love that. That's the right reasons. Let's hope that people really understand that that is the reason to do it. So Todd, if our audience wants to learn more about you and the work that you're doing, where can they find you?
Sure. The best way is to just go to my brand new website, toddcherches.com, and you can sign up for my list or download my book, my list of top visual leadership books. Follow me on LinkedIn. And those are the two best places to reach me. And then check out my book if you want to hear more of my stories, both success stories and failure stories. So thank you for having me, Lily.
This was really fun. Thanks so much for the conversation. It's always wonderful to spend time with you, Todd.
Okay.
Thanks.